The convoy moved through Gangnam like a knife through cloth. 3 black vehicles, tinted windows, no plates worth reading. It was a Tuesday, which meant nothing to most of Seoul but meant everything to the men inside the middle car. Tuesdays were when Minho collected. The lead SUV slowed first, then stopped. J1, sitting in the front passenger seat of the second vehicle, looked up from his phone. "Why are we stopping?" The driver said nothing. He just pointed. Standing in the middle of the road, not on the curb, not at the edge, but dead center, both arms out like she was daring the vehicles to keep moving, was a girl. Small, maybe 10 years old. Dark skin, dust on her knees. A torn yellow jacket 2 sizes too large hanging off one shoulder. She wasn't running. She wasn't flinching. She was just standing there, staring directly at the middle car as if she could see through the tinted glass. As if she knew exactly who was sitting behind it. In the back seat, Minho didn't look up immediately. He was reading something on a folded piece of paper, the kind of paper that didn't exist in any digital record, and he finished the line he was on before he allowed himself to acknowledge the stillness. When he finally raised his eyes and saw the girl through the windshield, his expression didn't change. That was the thing about Minho that men who worked for him spent years learning to read. His face never changed. The danger lived somewhere underneath. "Move her," he said. J1 was already opening his door. He crossed the distance in long strides, and when he reached the girl he towered over her by more than a foot. He said something in Korean, short, the tone of a man who didn't repeat himself. The girl didn't move. She looked up at him with the particular steadiness of someone who had been threatened before and had learned that stillness was a form of armor. J1 reached for her arm. "Tell him I know about Yeosu," she said. Her Korean was accented but clean. The kind learned not in a classroom but from living inside a language, absorbing it from the street up. J1's hand stopped mid-reach. He turned back toward the car. Minho had lowered his window 2 inches. Not enough to be seen, enough to hear. J1 walked back slowly, leaned down, and spoke quietly through the gap. Whatever he said made the window lower the rest of the way. Minho looked at the girl directly for the first time. She looked back at him and didn't look away. He studied her for a long moment. The yellow jacket, the bare feet inside worn sandals, the way she held her chin up even though her hands, if you looked carefully, were trembling at her sides. Not from fear, he decided. From the effort of standing still. "Bring her," he said. They took her to a building in Mapogu that didn't have a sign on the door. The ground floor looked like a closed printing business. The second floor was where Minho's people actually worked. The third floor was where conversations happened that nobody wrote down. They put her in a chair across from a low table. One of Minho's men stood by the door. J1 stood to the side with his arms crossed. Watching her the way you watch something you haven't decided is dangerous yet. Zuri sat with her hands in her lap and looked around the room without pretending she wasn't looking. There was a window with frosted glass. A single overhead light. A small shelf with 3 books on it. She noticed these things the way she had trained herself to notice things. Exits first, then objects, then people. Minho came in alone. He pulled a chair from the corner, set it in front of her rather than behind the table, and sat down so that they were at roughly the same level. This surprised her. She had expected him to stand over her. Men with power usually stood over you. He was younger than she'd expected up close. Early 50s, perhaps, though something in his eyes belonged to a much older version of him. His suit was dark gray, no tie. His hands were relaxed on his knees. He looked at her the way a person looks at a puzzle they have already decided to solve. Not impatient, not curious, simply focused. "How old are you?" he said. Not a question. More like the beginning of a calculation. "Old enough to know what I saw," Zuri said. "What did you see?" "I saw you in Yeosu 3 years ago, at the harbor. You were with a man named Baek Sungjin." She paused. "And you were crying." Welcome back to Afrokorean Storyhouse channel. Before we continue with this story, tell us in the comment section where you are watching from. And if you are new here, hit the like and subscribe button, and don't forget turn on your notification to get notified whenever we drop a video. The room did not change. The light did not shift. J1 to her left didn't move. But something happened in Minho's face. Something so brief and so deep that it was almost invisible, like a stone dropped into very still water and the surface closing back over it in less than a second. "You're going to tell me what a child was doing at the Yeosu harbor at night," he said. "I was sleeping under the dock. I sleep in different places. Sleeping in one place too long makes you findable." She said it plainly without asking for sympathy. "You didn't see me. Nobody sees me. And what you saw, you think it means something. I think you didn't want anyone to see it. And I think if the wrong people found out that Minho cried at the Yeosu harbor over a dead man, it would mean something very specific in the world you live in." Silence. Jae-won shifted his weight. Minho raised one hand slightly, barely a gesture, more like the idea of a gesture, and Jae-won went still again. "You stopped my convoy," Minho said, "on a public street. You put yourself in front of 3 cars with armed men inside them. To warn me about a deal." "Yes. Why?" Zuri looked at him steadily. "Because the man organizing the deal, the official, the one they call Counselor Park, he's the same one who paid to have the dock in Yeosu cleared the night I was there. He's the one who had Baek Sung-jin killed. And now he's using the deal to get close enough to you to finish what he started." She tilted her head slightly. "Whatever was between you and Baek Sung-jin, Counselor Park is betting you've spent 3 years burying it. He thinks your grief made you blind." Minho was quiet for a long time. Outside the frosted window, Seoul moved and hummed and didn't know this room existed. "How do you know about Counselor Park?" he said finally. "Because I've been following him for 8 months, Zuri said. "He took something from me too." She didn't tell him everything that night. That was deliberate. Zuri had survived long enough on Seoul streets to understand that information was the only currency a girl with nothing else could spend. And you didn't spend it all at once. You spent just enough to stay alive. Just enough to stay useful. Just enough that the person across from you had a reason to keep you in the room rather than outside of it. Minho seemed to understand this. He didn't push. He asked 3 more questions. Clean, surgical. And when she answered 2 of them and deflected the 3rd, he nodded as though this confirmed something he'd already suspected. He sent her downstairs with Jae-won while he made a call. She sat in the printing room below and looked at the old machines. They smelled of ink and dust and the particular silence of things that used to matter. Jae-won stood near the staircase, watching her without watching her. The practiced surveillance of a man paid to notice things. "The deal," she said without looking at him. "When is it supposed to close?" Jae-won said nothing. "I'm asking because the timeline matters," she said. "Park doesn't need it to close. He just needs Minho in the room when it's presented. That's when it happens." Jae-won's jaw moved slightly. "Friday," he said, and then looked like he hadn't meant to. Zuri nodded. 3 days. Upstairs, she could hear Minho's voice moving through the ceiling, low, controlled. The cadence of someone who had received bad news so many times that bad news had simply become information. She wondered what he was feeling beneath that voice. She wondered if he knew that the thing he tried hardest to hide was the thing that had led her straight to him. In her experience, that was always how it worked. The things people buried were never really buried. They just went underground and kept moving, until one day they surfaced somewhere you least expected. In a frosted glass room in Mapo-gu, wearing a torn yellow jacket, waiting to see if the most dangerous man in Seoul was brave enough to accept help from the smallest person in the city. She thought he might be. She thought that was either going to save them both or get them both killed. She'd been wrong before, but not often. Minho came back downstairs 20 minutes later. He didn't look at Zuri immediately. He walked to the far end of the room, stood with his back to her for a moment, and then turned around with the expression of a man who had made a decision and was already past the part where he questioned it. "The deal is a port expansion agreement," he said. "Counselor Park approached my organization 6 weeks ago. He said the infrastructure contract would move through his office, permits, approvals, the whole chain. Clean money. The kind that makes everything else look legitimate." He paused. "I was going to sign Friday." "I know," Zuri said. "You know. I've seen the documents. Or enough of them." Minho studied her. "Where?" "Park has an office assistant. A young woman named Soo-yeon. She doesn't know what she's carrying when she carries it. but she takes documents between Park's official office in Uido and a private address in Songbukdong. I followed her for 2 weeks before I understood the pattern. Zuri folded her hands in her lap. The contract has a clause buried in the third annex. It transfers liability for the port's existing debt structure onto your organization the moment the ink dries. The debt is not small, and it's attached to 3 shell accounts that investigators have been circling for 2 years. The room was very quiet. Jae-won turned from the staircase and looked at Min-ho with an expression that said he wanted very badly to say something but was waiting for permission. "Say it," Min-ho said. "We had the contract reviewed," Jae-won said. "Our lawyer went through it. He said it was clean." "Your lawyer didn't read the third annex," Zuri said. "Or he did and someone paid him more than you do." Jae-won's face tightened. Min-ho looked at him, not with anger, with the particular stillness of a man recalibrating. "Get me the contract. The physical copy. Tonight." He looked back at Zuri. "You stay here." "I'm not staying here," she said. "It wasn't a question." "I know." She met his eyes. "But I've survived this long by not being in one place when people decide what to do about me. So I'll come back tomorrow morning. Early. And I'll bring the documents I have." She stood up from the chair, slowly, the way someone stands when they're trying to demonstrate they are not running. "You can have me followed if you want. It won't work, but you can try." Something shifted in Min-ho's expression. Not quite amusement. Something adjacent to it. The involuntary response of a man who had not been surprised in a long time and found the sensation unexpectedly interesting. He looked at Jae-won. Jae-won looked back at him. "Let her go," Min-ho said. She slept that night in a place she had not slept before. That was the rule she never broke. A covered stairwell in a residential building near Hangik University. High enough that she could hear anyone coming. Low enough that she could move quickly if she needed to. She had 4 places like this scattered across the city. Rotated between them. Never stayed anywhere long enough to leave a shape behind. She lay on her side with her yellow jacket pulled tight and thought about Min-ho's face when she said the word Yeosu. She had expected fear. Or anger. Men like him, in her experience, moved very quickly from shock to anger. It was a reflex, the way a hand pulls back from heat. But Min-ho had done something different. He had gone inward. As if the word Yeosu was a door, and behind that door was a room he kept carefully locked. And she had not kicked it open but simply knocked, and that quiet knock had been worse than any force. She thought about Baek Sung-jin. She had not known his name when she saw him. She had learned it later, painstakingly, from fragments. An overheard conversation, a discarded newspaper, the way certain people in certain circles lowered their voices when the subject came near. Baek Sung-jin had been Min-ho's closest friend. Some said from childhood. Some said from the early days before Min-ho was Min-ho, when he was just another young man from the wrong neighborhood with too much intelligence and nowhere legitimate to put it. What she had seen at the Yeosu harbor was not something a man like Min-ho would ever want documented. Not because it was violent, because it was the opposite of violence. Because it was grief, raw and unguarded. The kind that belongs only to the deepest losses. The ones that don't announce themselves as love until they're gone. She had not used this against him. That was important to her. She had used it to get into the room. But she had not used it as a weapon. She wasn't sure he understood that distinction yet. She thought he would. She arrived at the Mapogu building at 7 in the morning. Jae-won opened the door before she knocked, which meant they had someone watching the street. She filed this information away without reacting to it. Upstairs, Min-ho was already at the table. In front of him was the contract. Physical pages spread out, some of them marked in red. Beside the contract was a second document she didn't recognize. His face had the particular quality of someone who had not slept. "Sit down," he said. She sat. "The third annex," he said. "You were right. I know. Our lawyer has been with us for 11 years. People change their loyalty when the number is large enough," Zuri said. "Or when the threat is specific enough. I don't know which one it was with your lawyer. But it doesn't matter right now. What matters is Friday." Min-ho nodded slowly. He looked at the documents in front of him and then looked at her. "What do you want?" She had been waiting for this question. She had rehearsed the answer many times in the past 8 months. Through cold nights and long surveillance walks and moments when she had almost given up on the whole thing and disappeared into some other city. She had kept coming back to the same answer every time. "Counselor Park took my mother from me," she said. "Not directly. He's not the kind of man who does things directly. He does them through systems, through paperwork and officials and quiet phone calls that leave no trace. My mother was a witness to something involving one of his construction projects. A death that was made to look like an accident. She was going to go to a journalist." Zuri's voice stayed level. She had practiced this too. "She disappeared 8 months ago. I've been living on these streets since then. I've been following Park since then." Minho said nothing. He was listening with his whole body, the stillness of someone giving full attention. "I don't want money," Zuri said. "I don't want protection. I want Park to answer for what he did to my mother. I want it to be real, official, not quiet." She looked at him directly. "You have reach I don't have. Connections to people who can make investigations happen and make them stick. I have information you need and time you don't have." She paused. "That's the arrangement I'm proposing." The silence stretched. Outside, Seoul was waking up. Somewhere below them a door opened and closed. The light through the frosted window had the gray-gold quality of early morning in the city. "You're 10 years old," Minho said. 11, she said. "Last month." Something moved across his face, there and gone, and he looked down at the papers for a moment before looking back up. "If I move against Park," he said carefully, "it won't be clean. Men like Park don't fall quietly. There will be consequences I can't fully predict. Things could get dangerous." "Dangerous?" Zuri repeated, with a flatness that made Jaewon, standing by the door, look at the floor. Minho heard it. He nodded once, acknowledging what she hadn't said. That dangerous was a word that required a baseline of safety to have meaning, and she had not had that baseline in a very long time. "All right," he said. "Show me what you have." She reached into the lining of her yellow jacket. A pocket sewn inside the inner seam that was invisible unless you knew where to look, and withdrew a folded envelope. Inside were photographs, small and precise, taken on a cheap phone she had found and repaired. Documents she had photographed through windows and from distances that should have made clear images impossible. Names, dates, account numbers written in her own hand in a small compressed script. She laid them out on the table beside his red-marked contract. Minho looked at them for a long time. Then he looked at her. "How long did this take you?" he said. 8 months, she said. 2 weeks, 3 days. He was quiet again. But this time the quality of his silence was different. It was not the silence of a man calculating. It was the silence of a man who had just understood something that he hadn't expected to understand today. He picked up one of the photographs, set it down, picked up another. "J1, he said without looking up. "Yes. Cancel Friday." Canceling Friday was the easy part. The harder part was what canceling Friday would signal. In the world Minho operated in, pulling out of an agreement at the last moment was not a neutral act. It was read as weakness or suspicion, or both. And a man who looked weak or suspicious became a target from directions he hadn't been watching. Minho understood this, which was why, by noon on Tuesday, he had not simply canceled. He had rescheduled. A brief message through the appropriate channel. A logistical delay. A minor issue with the internal review. Nothing unusual. Could they move to the following Wednesday? His people would be in touch to confirm the new location. Park's office responded within the hour. Of course, no problem at all. Wednesday worked perfectly. Minho read the response and said nothing. But Zuri, sitting across the room going through her own documents for the 3rd time, noticed that he held the phone a beat longer than necessary before setting it down. As if the speed of Park's agreement had confirmed something he'd hoped wasn't true. "He wants you in the room," she said without looking up. "I know. He's not going to wait long before he tries another angle. I know that too." She looked up. "So what are we doing with the week?" Minho turned from the window. He had the focused, slightly distant expression of someone running multiple calculations simultaneously. We need the third annex verified independently. Not by anyone connected to my organization, someone clean. A legal academic. Someone whose name means something in a courtroom. That takes time. 2 days. I know someone at Yonsei. He moved to the table. We also need to know who else Park has positioned around this deal. The lawyer didn't act alone. There are others inside my circle who've been touched. I need to know who and how deep. That's harder, Zuri said. People don't advertise that. No. But they behave differently when they know something is coming and are pretending they don't. He sat down. I've been watching my own people for 2 days. There are 2 I'm not certain about. Zuri considered this. What do you need from me today? Tell me everything you know about Park's private address in Songbukdong. She told him. She was precise and unembellished. The kind of account that comes from direct observation rather than inference. She described the building's exterior, the entrance pattern, the time she had seen lights on in specific windows, the vehicle that arrived every Thursday evening and stayed for approximately 40 minutes. She described Suyun's route, the bag she carried, the coffee shop she stopped at in Mapo on the way back where she always sat by the window and looked at her phone for exactly the length of time it took to drink 1 Americano. Minho listened without interrupting. He asked 2 questions when she finished, both of them precise. Then he said, the Thursday vehicle. Did you get a plate? Partial. Seoul 3, the rest was obscured. But the car is a dark blue Carnival, older model, and the left rear panel has a repaint. You can see the color difference in direct light. Jae-won, who had been writing quietly in the corner, looked up. I've seen that car, he said. Minho looked at him. Twice. Outside the Uido building. I didn't think anything of it. Jae-won's expression shifted into something careful and unpleasant. It was parked both times on nights when we had internal meetings. The room was very still. Which meetings? Minho said. Jae-won told him. Minho nodded slowly, and Zuri watched something move through his face. Not the stone-dropping stillness she had seen before, but something with more heat in it. Controlled heat. The kind that doesn't flare up but simply burns steadily and doesn't go out. Then we know one of the 2, he said. His name was Cho Hyun-suk. He had been with Minho's organization for 7 years. He ran logistics, the movement of money between legitimate fronts, the timing of transfers, the paperwork that made illegal income look like it had come from somewhere else. He was methodical and quiet and had a daughter in primary school and a wife who taught piano lessons in their apartment in Dongdaemun. Minho did not confront him. This surprised Zuri. She had expected, based on everything she understood about how men like Minho operated, that the discovery of a traitor would result in something swift and irreversible. Instead, Minho did something more patient. He had Cho Hyun-suk's access quietly redirected. Certain information that would normally pass through Cho's hands was rerouted without explanation. And into the channel that Cho still believed was live, Minho began feeding carefully constructed misinformation. Small, plausible details about the Wednesday meeting that were close enough to the truth to be believed but wrong in specific ways that would matter. He was building a current and pointing it somewhere deliberate. Zuri watched him work through Wednesday and she revised her understanding of him. She had come into that first meeting with a theory of Minho built from observation at a distance, a man of force, of hierarchy, of consequences. What she was seeing now was something more architectural. He didn't solve problems by removing them. He solved them by reshaping the space around them until they went where he needed them to go. She found this, unexpectedly, somewhat familiar. On Wednesday evening, he looked across the table at her and said, "You've been very quiet today. I think better quietly. What are you thinking about?" She considered whether to answer honestly. She usually didn't. Honesty was another currency you spent carefully. But something about the directness of the question, and the fact that he had asked it at all, made her decide. "I'm thinking about what happens after," she said. "After Park. After the evidence goes wherever it goes and the official process does whatever it does." She looked at him steadily. "I've watched enough of those processes to know they don't always finish. They start. They make noise. And then something happens and they go quiet and the person who started them is suddenly very exposed and very alone. Minho was watching her. I need to know that won't happen here, she said. I need to know that when I hand everything over in Park is in the current, whatever you're building, I don't disappear from the plan. The silence that followed was not uncomfortable. It had the quality of something being weighed honestly. I don't disappear people who help me, Minho said. That's not what I'm asking. I'm asking if you'll stay in the process. If your name and your reach stay attached to this until it finishes. Not as a protector, as a guarantor. He looked at her for a long moment. You've thought about this for a long time, he said. 8 months, 2 weeks, 3 days, she said. Something in him settled visibly, almost physically, like a held breath releasing. He nodded. Yes, he said. Until it finishes. Thursday came and the Blue Carnival arrived in Songbukdong at its usual time. Minho's people followed it when it left. Not closely, nothing that could be noticed. Carefully, the way you follow something you don't want to startle. The car drove south and west and eventually stopped outside a restaurant in Seoul that served Japanese food and had private dining rooms in the back. The driver went inside and stayed for 50 minutes. When he came out, one of Minho's people was close enough to confirm the face. His name was reported back to Minho by phone. 2 words. Minho listened, said nothing, ended the call. He was standing at the window when Zuri came back into the room from the small space they had set up for her to sleep in. A folding cot behind a partition, a luxury so foreign that she had spent the first night lying awake simply because the surface beneath her wasn't concrete. The second one, she said. It was not a question. Yes. Who is it? He was quiet for a moment. Then he said a name she didn't recognize. But she recognized what it meant from the way he said it, with the particular flatness of a man saying something that costs him to say out loud. Someone close, she said. My brother-in-law, he said. She didn't say anything. She had learned that there were moments when the right response was no response, when silence was the only honest thing. He stood at the window for a long time. Seoul moved below and around and through everything, indifferent and relentless and lit up against the dark. He has a family, Minho said, not to her specifically, more to the window, more to the version of himself that was still calculating what this meant and what it required. I know, she said. So did my mother. He turned and looked at her. She held his gaze. She was not trying to be cruel. She was trying to say something true about the weight of the thing they were both carrying, that the people who got hurt in these situations were rarely the ones who deserved it most, and that this was the real cost of men like Park, who arranged their violence through systems and paperwork and other people's proximity so that by the time the damage landed it was 3 or 4 steps removed from them and they could look at it with clean hands. Minho seemed to understand this. He looked at her for a long time with an expression she hadn't seen on him before. Not the calculation, not the controlled heat, not the stone-dropping stillness. Something quieter than all of those. Something that lived in the same neighborhood as the thing she had seen at the Yeosu harbor. Get some sleep, he said finally. Tomorrow we build the current. Friday was supposed to have been the end of Minho. Instead, Friday became the day they built the thing that would end Park. It started at 6 in the morning with Zuri laying out everything she had collected across 8 months on the long table in the Meipogu room. Photographs, handwritten notes, partial account numbers, dates cross-referenced with public records she had accessed through library terminals across the city. It was not a complete picture. It was better than that. It was a precise picture of the most important parts, with enough connective tissue that anyone looking at it would understand immediately what it was showing. Minho sat across from her and went through each piece methodically. He asked questions. She answered them. Jae-won took notes in his careful, compressed handwriting and periodically left the room to make calls and returned with additional information that he layered into the growing document they were assembling. By mid-morning the shape of it was clear. Park Sung-won had been running a parallel operation for at least 4 years. On the surface he was a mid-level government official with infrastructure oversight, unremarkable, moderately powerful, the kind of bureaucrat who appeared in the background of photographs at official events and was never the subject of the caption. Beneath that surface he had been systematically selling access to permits, to approvals, to the suppression of inconvenient investigations. He had at least 6 organizations in his pocket across Seoul and the surrounding region. Minho's organization had been the last and the largest, and unlike the others, Minho had not been a willing participant. He had simply been a target that Park had spent 2 years preparing to absorb. The death that Zuri's mother had witnessed, a construction supervisor named Lim Dongchul, killed and staged as a fall on a work site in Dobong-gu, had been the cleanup of a loose end from one of Park's earlier operations. Her mother, Adiz, had been a cleaning contractor at the office building adjacent to the site. She had seen something at the wrong time on the wrong morning. She had told no one except a journalist she trusted, a woman named Han Soo-jin who wrote for a small independent outlet that had since been quietly defunded. Adiz had disappeared 11 days after making contact with Han Soo-jin. Han Soo-jin had received a tax investigation notice 8 days after that. The investigation was ongoing. She had not published anything since. When Zuri had finished laying this out, the room was very quiet. Jae-won set down his pen. Minho looked at the table and then looked at Zuri with the expression of a man who has just understood the full dimensions of something he thought he already understood. "Your mother is alive," he said. It was not quite a question. Zuri had been waiting for this moment. She had been waiting for it since the first morning in this room, since the first time she had decided to trust this man with the outline of the truth. She had held the center of it back. Not from dishonesty, but from the same instinct that had kept her alive for 8 months. You revealed the most important thing last. You waited until the ground was solid enough to put weight on it. "I think so," she said. "I haven't been able to confirm it, but Park doesn't kill people he can still use. My mother knows things he hasn't fully extracted yet. There's a detention facility outside Gapyeong that doesn't officially exist in any public record. I found a reference to it in documents I photographed from Soo-yeon's bag 3 months ago. I didn't understand what it referred to until later. The silence in the room had a different quality now. I need her to be part of what happens to Park," Zuri said. "Whatever we build, the evidence, the process, the people who receive it, it needs to move fast enough that he can't use her as leverage or remove her before it lands." Minho nodded. "Once, definitively. Then that changes the sequence," he said. "We don't go to the investigators first. We go to Gapyeong first." Saturday moved differently from the days before it. There was a quality to it that Zuri recognized from the hours before difficult things, a kind of sharpened ordinariness, where small details became very vivid and time seemed to be moving at 2 speeds simultaneously. Minho spent the morning in a series of conversations she was not part of. She could hear his voice through walls, controlled, methodical, the cadence shifting depending on who he was speaking to. Some calls were short, some were long. Once she heard something that might have been an argument, contained and quiet, and then it stopped and there was silence and then his voice again, even and final. Jae-won came and went. At noon Minho came to find her. She was in the corner of the main room doing something she had not done in front of anyone since her mother disappeared. She was drawing. A small notebook, a pencil stub. She closed it when she heard him, but not quickly enough. He looked at the notebook and didn't comment on it directly. He sat down. "Tonight," he said, "there's a man I trust, genuinely trust, which is a short list, who has connections to private security operations that run parallel to official channels. He can get a team to Gapyeong without it touching anything that Park might be monitoring. But it needs to happen before Wednesday. If Park gets any signal that the deal is compromised, the first thing he does is clean the facility." "How confident are you in this man?" Zuri said. "As confident as I am in anything," he said. "Which means I've verified it 3 times and I'm still prepared for it to go wrong." She looked at him. "That's honest." "I find honesty more efficient at this point in my life," he said. And then, almost as an afterthought, "What were you drawing?" She considered. Then she opened the notebook to the page she had been working on and held it up briefly before closing it again. It was a face. A woman's face, rendered from memory with the careful precision of someone who is afraid of forgetting. Minho looked at it for the moment she allowed. He said nothing, but something in his posture changed, barely perceptible, a degree of softening that she suspected very few people had ever seen and that he probably didn't know he was showing. "She has your eyes," he said. Zuri said nothing. She put the notebook back in the inner pocket of the yellow jacket. "Baek Sung-jin," she said after a moment. Were you with him a long time? The question landed in the room gently. She had thought carefully about when to ask it, and she had decided that now, in this space of earned trust, before the thing they were about to do together, was the right time. Not to use it, not to hold it, just to acknowledge that she knew, and that knowing it had not changed how she had treated him, and that this was something she wanted him to understand before Saturday night. Minho was quiet for a long moment. Most of my life, he said. I'm sorry, she said. She meant it simply, without architecture around it. He looked at her for a moment with that expression again, the quiet one, the one from the same neighborhood as the harbor. Then he nodded once. Park had him killed, he said. I didn't know that until this week. I thought it was the rival organization in Incheon. I spent 2 years pointed in the wrong direction. He paused. That's what Park does. He arranges the distance between himself and the damage, and then he fills that distance with other explanations. Yes, Zuri said. He's very good at that. He was, Minho said. The tense was deliberate. Saturday night the team went to Gapyeong. Zuri was not with them. This was not Minho's decision, it was hers. She had made it clearly and without negotiation. She could not be in that facility until it was confirmed safe, and she could not confirm it was safe until someone else had gone first. And she understood this intellectually, even though every part of her that was 11 years old and had spent 8 months drawing her mother's face from memory wanted to be in that vehicle. She sat in the Mapogu room with one of Minho's people, a young woman named Yoonji who brought her rice and didn't try to make conversation, which Zuri appreciated enormously, and she waited. Minho had stayed too. She realized this around midnight, when she heard movement upstairs and understood he had not left with the team. She didn't go up, but knowing he was there, in the same building, awake, waiting, she found this steadied something in her that she hadn't known needed steadying. The call came at 2:17 in the morning. She heard his footsteps change. A single shift in the rhythm of his pacing above her, barely audible, then quiet, then his voice, short and controlled and asking one question she couldn't make out through the ceiling. Then footsteps on the stairs. He came into the room and looked at her directly. She's there, he said. She's alive. Zuri sat very still for a moment. Then she pressed both hands flat against her knees and looked at the floor and breathed. She did not cry. She had trained herself out of crying a long time ago. It used energy she couldn't afford, and it made her less visible to herself, which was the one thing she needed to be. But something moved through her that was large and old and had been waiting in a locked room for 8 months, 2 weeks, and 4 days, and she let it move through her without trying to stop it or name it. When she looked up, Minho was still standing there. He had not looked away. He had not moved to another part of the room or found something to do with his hands. He was simply present, in the way that people are present when they understand that presence is what's required. Is she hurt? Zuri said. Her voice was level. She's not well, but she's stable. They're bringing her out now. He paused. She'll be somewhere safe by morning. Zuri nodded. Wednesday still needs to happen, she said. Yes. Then let's finish it. Sunday and Monday passed in the focused quiet of people preparing for something they couldn't afford to get wrong. Minho's contact at Yonsei delivered his analysis of the third annex on Sunday afternoon. 12 pages, precise and damning, written in the careful language of academic law that would be very difficult for anyone to dismiss or reframe. The liability clause was exactly what Zuri had identified. The shell accounts attached to it had a paper trail that led, with enough forensic patience, back to 3 separate incidents of financial fraud spanning 7 years. The document was signed, dated, notarized. Minho read it twice and then placed it in a folder with the photographs and the handwritten notes and the partial account numbers and the careful cross-references that an 11-year-old girl had assembled across 8 months of sleeping under docks and in covered stairwells and anywhere else that was high enough to hear someone coming. He looked at the folder for a moment before closing it. Then he made 2 calls. The first was to a prosecutor he had never used before, a woman in her 40s named Shim Eunhwa who had a reputation for finishing things, which was rarer than it should have been. He did not tell her everything on the phone. He told her enough. She was quiet for a long time after he finished, and then she said she would need to see the physical evidence before she committed to anything. He said he understood. They arranged a meeting for Tuesday morning. The second call was shorter. It was to the journalist, Han Soo-jin, whose tax investigation had been running for 8 months and who had not published anything since Adiz disappeared. Min-ho told her only that her source was alive and that there would be something on her desk by Wednesday evening that would make the tax investigation irrelevant. Han Soo-jin said nothing for so long that he checked the connection. Then she said, "What do you need from me?" He told her. She said yes. Monday was logistics. Cho Hyun-suk, the logistics man, continued to receive his carefully redirected information flow and continued to report it to whoever was receiving it on the other end. The misinformation Min-ho had been feeding him was now fully constructed. A false meeting location for Wednesday, a false time, a false attendee list that included names Park would find significant. It was detailed enough to be convincing and wrong in every way that mattered. The brother-in-law was a harder problem. Min-ho handled it himself, privately, in a conversation Zuri was not present for and did not ask about. What she knew was that on Monday evening Min-ho came back into the main room with the look of a man who had done something costly and necessary and was not going to discuss it, and she respected this the way she respected all the things in the room that belonged to him. She spent Monday in a different kind of preparation. She asked Yoon-ji if there was somewhere she could get clean clothes. Yoon-ji looked at the yellow jacket. Torn at the left shoulder, stained along the hem, the inner seam repaired so many times the thread had become a record of the months, and nodded without making anything of it. She came back an hour later with a bag. Inside was a dark green jacket, a clean shirt, trousers that were close to the right size. Zuri changed in the small room behind the partition and stood for a moment looking at the yellow jacket on the cot. She folded it carefully and put it in the bag. She was not ready to leave it behind, but she was ready to put it away. Tuesday morning, Prosecutor Shim Eun-hwa arrived at the Mapogu building at 9 o'clock. She was a compact woman with short hair and reading glasses pushed up on her forehead, and the particular manner of someone who had spent decades in rooms where people tried to waste her time and had developed an efficient, almost architectural impatience with it. She sat down at the table, opened the folder, and read for 40 minutes without speaking. Zuri sat in the corner and watched her read. Shim Eun-hwa looked up once, midway through, and looked at Zuri directly. Not with surprise, with assessment. The look of someone recalibrating the source of what she was reading. She finished, closed the folder, and looked at Min-ho. "This is sufficient to open a formal investigation," she said. "With this and the academic analysis, I can get a warrant for Park's financial records within 48 hours. The shell accounts alone will generate secondary warrants automatically." She paused. "The facility in Gapyeong needs to be documented before he has any opportunity to address it. The witness needs to give a formal statement as soon as she is medically able." "She'll be ready," Zuri said from the corner. Shim Eun-hwa looked at her again, this time with something that wasn't quite a smile but lived in the same vicinity. "How long did this take you to compile?" she said. 8 months, Zuri said. 2 weeks, for days. Shim Eun-hwa looked at the folder and then back at Zuri and then at Min-ho. "Make sure nothing happens to her," she said, as if this were a procedural instruction, and moved on. Wednesday arrived the way significant days always arrive. Looking exactly like any other day from the outside, the city moving through its ordinary rhythms with no awareness of what was running underneath. Park Sung-won arrived at the false meeting location at 10 o'clock in the morning. A building in Uido, the address provided by Cho Hyun-suk through the misinformation channel. He arrived with 2 aides and the particular confidence of a man who believed he was walking into the final step of a plan 2 years in the making. The building was real. The meeting room was real. The people waiting inside were not Min-ho's people. They were Prosecutor Shim Eun-hwa's. The warrant had come through at 7 that morning. Shim Eun-hwa had moved with the efficiency of someone who understood that speed was the difference between a case and a cleanup. By the time Park walked through the door, his financial records were already being accessed. The Gapyeong facility was being formally documented by a second team, and Han Soo-jin had a sealed package on her desk that she would open at noon. Zuri heard about Park's arrest through J1, who received the confirmation call at 10:23 and relayed it to Min-ho with 2 words. Min-ho nodded. He was standing at the window again, the same window where she had first watched him process difficult information, where she had learned to read the quality of his silences. He stood there for a moment and then turned around and looked at her. "It's done," he said. She nodded. She had thought about this moment many times. In the versions she had imagined, she felt something large and conclusive, relief or triumph, or the particular release of something that had been held under pressure for a very long time. What she actually felt was quieter than that. More like the feeling of setting something heavy down. Not euphoria. Just the absence of the weight. "I want to see her," she said. "The car is ready," he said. Adiz was in a private medical facility in Yunpyeonggu that Minho's people had arranged, clean and quiet. A room with a window that looked onto a small garden. She had lost weight and there was a steadiness missing from her movements that had always been there before. A physical confidence that Zuri associated so deeply with her mother that its absence was its own kind of wound. But her eyes were the same. When Zuri came through the door they found her immediately, and whatever had been locked behind them for 8 months opened all at once. They held each other for a long time. Zuri did not try to be still. She let herself be 11 years old in a way she had not allowed since the morning her mother didn't come home. And she held on with both arms and her face pressed into the familiar warmth of her mother's shoulder, and she breathed. Adiz said her name. Just her name, repeated, like a hand checking that something precious was still intact. Minho had not come inside. He was in the corridor, and Zuri was aware of this distantly. The shape of him through the small window in the door, facing away, giving them the privacy of the moment with the discretion of someone who understood its dimensions. Later, when Zuri came back into the corridor, her eyes were dry. Minho looked at her and she looked at him, and neither of them said anything for a moment. Then she said, "Thank you." He nodded once. "What happens now?" she said. "For you." He considered this. It was a real question and he gave it the weight it deserved. Park's network will take time to fully unravel. There will be complications. There are always complications. He paused. But Sung-jin gets justice. That matters. She looked at him. "And your organization?" "My organization will navigate what it navigates," he said. "It always has." She understood what he wasn't saying, that the public exposure of Park would generate scrutiny that moved in all directions, including toward him, and that he had known this when he agreed to go forward, and that he had gone forward anyway. She understood that this was the thing she hadn't fully accounted for in her calculations. That the man she had stopped in the middle of the road had agreed to burn part of his own world down to finish this correctly. She thought about what to say. Then she decided that what she had already said was enough. 3 weeks later, Han Soo-jin's article ran. It was the first of 7 published over the following month, each one building on the last with the patience and precision of someone who had been waiting a long time to say something true and was not going to waste the opportunity. Park Sung-jin's arrest generated a formal investigation that expanded, as Shim Eun-hwa had predicted, in multiple directions simultaneously. 4 other officials were named in the first 2 weeks, 12 by the end of the month. Adiz gave her formal statement from the medical facility, sitting upright in the bed with Zuri beside her. Prosecutor Shim Eun-hwa conducted the interview herself. Afterward she looked at them both, mother and daughter, the woman who had seen something and the girl who had refused to let it disappear, and said, with her efficient almost smile, "It will hold." It held. The yellow jacket, Zuri discovered, had been washed and folded and placed in a bag by Yoon-ji while she was at the medical facility. She found it on the cot when she went back to collect her things. She stood there holding it for a moment. She put it in her bag. Not because she would need it, because it was hers. 6 weeks after the convoy stopped on a Tuesday morning in Gangnam, Minho received a letter. No envelope. A single folded page, left at the Mapogu building with the person on the door. His name written on the outside in a small compressed script he recognized. Inside was a drawing. A street scene, Seoul at night, rendered with careful precision. The light from shop windows catching the wet pavement. A 3-car convoy moving through the frame. And in the middle of the road, arms out, a small figure in a yellow jacket. Below the drawing, for words, "You stop too. Z." Minho stood in the room where it had all started and read the 4 words twice. Then he folded the page carefully and put it in the inside pocket of his jacket. Close. Outside, Seoul moved and hummed and carried its millions of ordinary Tuesdays forward into whatever came next. He stood there a moment longer. Then he smiled. Just slightly. Just enough. Thank you for watching. If the story moved you, don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe to Afrokorean Storyhouse channel. There are more stories where this came from, and you don't want to miss what's coming next. Drop a comment below and tell us, what moment hit you hardest?